Just wanted to say that, since we are talking about books, that this particular presentation is also on the occasion of a book which is on display and on sale. It's called the Kasauli Art Center 1976 to 1991, published by Tulika Books. As you all know, Vivan Sundaram passed away in late March last year. And he was a good friend, not only of mine and of many, many people here, but of a lot of other people. And in some ways, there is a certain collectivity, which I think will be of relevance to the tribute that I think we should be paying someone like him. When an artist passes away, you see his or her entire life's work as though in a flash. Somehow it all comes together. When Vivan, and I even refer to him in the first person with a curious feeling, it is really, can you see there, Vivan? It used to be a small little signature in one corner, and he only called himself Vivan. Everyone called him Vivan. When Vivan, and even I refer to him in the first person with a curious feeling, passed away, it felt strange. It was startling to see how many people he knew, how many people referred to him as such, as Vivan, said or felt that they knew him, and yet others who felt or said that they had lost someone they knew, they thought they knew. The obituaries in newspapers, but also in independent blogs and posts and in tags numbered literally in their thousands. And much of it was personal, much of it was deeply felt. What also happens when an artist leaves us in this way is the way in which the universe that the artist occupies actually comes together. And the artworks, whatever we knew of them, also then come together, as though we knew them too. It's as though the artist and the artwork meld, fuse into a familiar whole. When this happened to Vivan, it was, as inevitably the case with him, in a particular way. On the one hand, he was often described as an artist who worked with multimedia. This is what he's conventionally talked about, the artist who brought installation art to India, as an artist who worked in multiple media forms. On the other hand, what we typically saw at that time and imagined when we closed our eyes and imagined Vivan in those days was an art like this. This was the Vivan that, in some sense, I think, remains the public imagination of who he was. It's a 1980 painting. It's a very early painting. And it's a classic of its time. It refers to Leonardo. The figure is very clearly taken from there. It has a distinct treatment of landscape, and that would become something of a signature style. References to miniature painting, you get the wall in between, you get these images on different sides, straightforwardly from miniature painting, and the spaces, the luminous color, and the enlargement and diminishing of figures. And there are the specifics of the reference. Perhaps a defining image of the 1970s, the incident of custodial rape that came to be known as the Mathura rape case, when on 26th of March 1972, a young tribal girl was raped by two policemen in the compound of the Desaiganj police station in Gadchiroli in Maharashtra. So there was the kind of public Vivan, there was this particular kind of art that came to be very prominent at that time. And then there was this kind of image. But there was also a different sort of publicness. Perhaps a different route to history. This is called Year of the Barricades 2018, and it was actually one of the last significant works, major works that Vivan did, apart from the works that came in the Sharjah Biennale. It's called the Year of the Barricades. One of his very last works, a wall of personal pin-ups with which he sought to return to history rather differently, in a way that brought together a lot of things into a single frame. It returns us to the romance of 1968, something that he was quite interested in wanting to return to the student movements in Europe, of which he was an active participant. Behind that gigantic flag, however, there are numerous little images. There are hundreds of images, pin-ups stuck, as though stuck on a teenager's wall. Some are major events of involving key figures in Europe, the big European history of this time in 1968-69. And then there are several personal mementos. This is a detail from that work. There is a letter, for example, written to him by Adil Jasawala. There is another letter by Farooq Dhondi. There is a statement by Prabhat Patnaik. There is a letter by Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh. And there is a way of telling large stories through the intimate and the personal. More importantly, there is a way of telling a story through a collaborative tale, right? Through the 1980s, when he was making these big oils on canvas, he was also doing this. Last September, a massive book was published, which is the book I've already mentioned, with the simple name, Kasauli Art Center, 1976 to 1991, including a precious archive of some 15 years. You know, it was a 15-year period, when Vivan, inheriting from his mother a villa in a place called Kasauli in Himachal Pradesh, had organized numerous art camps, artist talks, workshops, conferences, theater performances, and film events. It was a long time ago. It was an essentially innocent time. You know, here you get, for example, a painstaking list of, I think, an accounts for 8,000 rupees, which constitutes a return of the kind of art that was made, a return of art to the support that was given to him by the Punjab University. It's a long time ago. It was essentially an innocent time when politics was still relatively straightforward. And that's Bhupen Khakkar, a photograph of Bhupen Khakkar and Bhupen as he appears in a Vivan Sundaram painting called About Waiting and Wandering. You get a whole series of letters that were written to him, again, sort of recalling the year of the barricades. And then something changed. It is that change that I'm interested in wanting to talk about, a move from the, shall we say, the innocence of the 80s and a certain idea of what was political art, what was politics, to something quite different. This is also from that. This is an exhibition that took place in Chandigarh in October at the Punjab University. And then comes something like this. It's a drawing it's a work that made in 1991, a drawing of Gulf War terrain as though caught in mid-explosion, extended from the wall to the floor, where there was a tray of burnt engine oil. It was one of a series that he called Engine Oil and Charcoal on Paper, made between 1990 and 1991, which actually signaled that something now was different, something, you know, it was no longer the 80s. In the middle of what was very likely the planet's first truly postmodern war. Approaching 100,000 sorties, this is the name of the work here, a massive floor-to-ceiling drawing with oil on paper and on floor, as though caught in the swirling middle of a bomb explosion, oil soaked through thick handmade paper, placed in trays on the floor. There was in one way nothing that had quite prepared us for this sudden transformation. It wasn't as though anything that he had done in Kasauli or in the oil paintings had exactly told us that this was the change that was going to take place. Art making and art authorship would gradually be transformed into something less innocent, something far more radical. This was art making now by other means, so to say, the expansion and the radicalization of what art meant, how it could be made, and for whom it could be made. It was a fairly modest beginning to the change that happened. This is a work called Penal Settlement that he made in 1987. It was a modest transformation. As you could see, the transformation begins with a work that he made here, following an unexpected late 1980s visit to Auschwitz in Poland, prompted, sort of the charcoal drawing that he made, which would signal the beginning of definitive change, the scale of which we can only understand in retrospect. An entire cycle of darkly dystopian drawings in thick charcoal began. They're called Long Night. Okay, this is what's new here. Giving us several top-angle images of unremittingly bleak, bombed-out landscapes over which hovers an amalgam of mythic firebirds and aerial WMDs. More importantly, perhaps, was a turn towards what we might call a darker, more threatening representation of state totalitarianism. There are early works that signal the change that might happen. This is a work that he made in 1976 during the emergency. It's called Gang of Three. They're called the emergency drawings, and they're grimly prescient, featuring Indira Gandhi's visage atop a mushroom cloud and a a kind of military armament that might, we might think of as having given us a long-term history to this shift, which itself, I think, returns to Second World War. And yet, there was something new. There was a different Vivan here. The 80s had ended. Part of the reason was personal. I mean, it was, as always at Vivan, there was a certain personal element to this. This was the death of Safdar Hashmi, and this particular work is called Safdar and Moloishri. It is one of his very last oil paintings. He actually more or less stopped doing oil paintings after that and turned towards a new form of organization. The work of the Memorial Trust that was set up in Safdar's name, of which Vivan was one of the founders, saw him shift much of his organizational energy from what was the Kasoli mode into something else. He stopped making oil paintings. He also stopped the Kasoli events and turned towards a new kind of organization, towards a new kind of, shall we say, expanded art, which also led to a new form of, shall we also say, expanded organization, both inside and outside of art making. It was also, I think, a time when he truly exploded the era of the national modern. I think this is a really important break that now we must look at. Of the time when an aesthetic of modernism still ruled under the aegis of a benevolent state. The times were changing dramatically, and so was his work. A scant year after Engine Oils came the Babri Masjid debacle. This was when his work truly widened. A massive project titled Memorial reprises a photograph, a news photograph of a man lying dead on a street. It was taken during the deadly riots that occurred in Bombay between December 92 and January 93, leaving 900 dead, ostensibly as a result of the demolition of the Babri Masjid by right-wing pro-Hindutva mobs. The events of these 2 months in India as a whole, and Bombay specifically, presented and continue to present, as we well know, an entirely new challenge to the political theory of modern India. They also, of course, challenge what art making should look like. Memorial's interiorization stood when it was made and shown in Delhi and Mumbai in sharply defined contrast to much of what was said and done in response to the events of the time. For one, the relentlessness of nails that are hammered in, and there were hundreds and hundreds of nails that were hammered in, as though in repeated and often manic castigation, as well as mourning, and its painstaking insistence on giving a man the burial that he had never received, suffused with the futile effort to atone for that act of destruction that could now never be undone. A senseless, meaningless death is sought through pure repetition to be given meaning. A story is told and retold. An entire ritual created to allow the man to die in peace. We first enter and breach a barrier, a pure metal object, itself drained of meaning and yet full of it, as though the symbolic "thou shalt not enter" acme of state power. We then traverse over rivulets of bloodied water through a gateway of old trunks as they salute the fallen mortal. The dead man is moved as though a formal gun carriage that evokes a history of fallen prime ministers receiving full state honors. Then the man is buried not once, but again and again, and in the end, it is almost as though the spirit is freed. By the late 90s, the spaces had become massive. I mean, this was really large now. The nature of the materials had increased exponentially, and most crucially, the number of people now included fellow artists, academics, artisans, carpenters, photographers, filmmakers, social activists, writers, artists, technicians, and publishers. Later that decade, Sundaram took over the entire Victoria Memorial in Calcutta, this is the work that we have there, to make a work of history, structures of memory, modern Bengal 1998, working with historians, social scientists, and artists. I'll play you a small clip of a film that was shot by Ranjan Palit.
rail track, the spine of the show. If, for Marx, the concept metaphor for history was the locomotive, then we cannot forget Walter Benjamin's sardonic afternote. History is not so much a train ride, but grabbing the emergency brake. The studio space and the site of the exhibition are the same. In the gear, tackle, and trim, there is a thingness of things, a bricolage of wonder at the persistence of human labor.
A lot of friends, I think, will recognize a lot of references. I mean, the rail track is clearly a reference to Ghatak's famous Komal Gandhar and that famous Dohai Ali track that you get in the film. There are a huge number of other references. I mean, it was a massive work which had neon on the top, and it ended with this sort of central location in which you have the throne of Queen Victoria, actually with just a plastic chair in the center, a kind of a nothing that's there in the center. In 2012, I think Sundaram made another work, which is the work that I want to more or less conclude this with. Another breakthrough project. It was called Gaga Waka, Making Strange. Sometime in the 90s or the early 2000s, he was getting very interested in the area that one might broadly call trash. There were a whole series of works that he had done using waste matter. This was matter that he would often find in the second-hand streets or in waste locations. One was called Living It Out in Delhi. There were a series of other works that happened, and this is what culminated. It was called Gaga Waka, Making Strange, which for the first time brought, I think, these two sets of images together. So on the one hand, you had this kind of, shall we say, the larger history that would be associated with, as I'm saying, things like the imaginations of state totalitarianism. But on the other hand, you also had a certain very, very specific, often very local materials. Trash had used metal cans, medicine pills, shoe soles, plastic, used tampons, rubber tires, hospital waste, all designed to become costumes to be worn by models, including by fashion models. These models now, in their sinewy sexiness, became as though effigies walking past the wall of trunks, and remember the wall of trunks that we had already seen in Memorial, that had once come together to name the gateway of the fallen mortal. I'll show you another clip from Gaga Waka. Structures of memory, which I'd shown earlier, as I'd mentioned already, was working with historians, social scientists, and artists. And Gaga Baka, which I've just shown you, which used industrial waste, was a collaboration with the fashion designer Pratima Pandey, the sound artist Ish, and included theater actors, dancers, performance artists, and tailors. He would then make a series of further works, which I won't be talking about. 409 Ramkinkars, for example, a performance installation theatre piece sprawling across the Indira Gandhi National Centre for the Arts, made together with theatre directors, authors, filmmakers. And I want to now basically conclude this, since this is a lit fest, by talking about books. I'll just end this by mentioning, as I said, that the Kasoli Art Center book is available outside. I want to say that one of his major projects was with the Shergill Sundaram Arts Foundation and Tulika Books, represented here by its publisher, Indira Chandrasekhar, who I think is here somewhere, with whom a whole project was put together, which I'll just spend 2 minutes talking about. A series of books which partly record the Victoria Memorial event and its companion work. The Victoria Memorial book is called The History Project, published in 2017, which is in some ways, you might say, a companion work to the Kasoli Art Center book, as well as another book which I think is available here. It's called Vivan Sundaram is Not a Photographer, in 2019, which I think reveals yet another project collaboration. There was, in all this, and this kind of specific emphasis on publishing, clearly history to this, and a reason then for the shift that I wanted to talk about in this, a shift away from what one might talk about as the Kasoli mode that existed sort of from the late 70s through the 80s, into something larger, wider, spanning locations, spanning cities, spanning materials and collaborators. Part of it was defined by location, much of it an expansion of a curatorial impulse. Whatever it was by now certainly not limited to those who worked with him or saw him simply as Vivan, and numerous people did. But it also included viewers who had by this time become as though his fellow art makers. For now, by now, when you stepped inside his art, as the title of a 2017 retrospective that he had in the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art suggests, you were no longer a stranger. Thank you.
Vivan Sundaram was related to Amrita Shergill, I believe.
Yes.
So is there any influence of her technique or subject matter in his Kasoli paintings?
I mean, there were no such things as Kasoli paintings. In Kasoli, he was using that as a venue or as a space within which to organize events. Coinciding with more or less the time that this book defines as the Kasoli period is the time which also coincides with what you might describe as the painterly Vivan, when he used to basically do paintings. My own understanding of him was that at that time, he was interested in the family. He has a very famous portrait of his father, for example. His mother, Indira, who was Amrita's sister, they do feature occasionally. But he was not really, in those days, I think, really inclined to talking about Amrita so much. The interest in Amrita actually happens very much more recently, and it coincides with his interest in his grandfather, Umrao Singh Shergill, so Amrita's father, Umrao Singh, who was a photographer. So sometime around, I think, as I was saying, around the time when he more or less put oil painting behind him, he also turned, in addition to everything else that he did, to photography. And these are photo montages. There's a particular book called Retake on Amrita, also published by Tulika, which kind of includes this very deep interest in Amrita and in the family. He has one very very large oil painting that is actually, if you ever visited him in his house, and it's still there in the house, actually occupies the pride of place, a major oil painting, in which, in a way, the entire family story is told. So there is Amrita, there is Indira, there is Umrao Singh, There is Marie Antoinette, who is Amrita's mother, who is a Hungarian, who it is said committed suicide. And there is, you can actually see even the little Vivan himself. So there is a certain interest in the family that happens only much more recently, if you like. I mean, there are references, so I don't see it in the Kasoli period as being there. I mean, there's a lot to be said about this particular kind of family history that I think does also, I didn't talk about it here, that sort of throws light on the transformation that I was trying to talk about, the shift away from the shall I say, the national modern and into something else that I think you can track from more or less the early 90s onwards.
Thanks, Ashish. My question goes back to what you said about him turning to more collaborative pieces after the 80s. And I was wondering if this was perhaps in response to the fracturing that he saw in society, religion.
Sorry, a bit slowly. I can't hear you so
Sorry. Is this better? Yeah. Okay. My question goes back to what you said about him increasing collaborations post the 80s. Yeah. And I was wondering if this was because he believed in more of a community voice in response to the fracturing that he saw in society, politics, and religion prior to.
Yeah, I mean, there would certainly. I mean, the framing politically would be along those lines. What it did, I think, was something in addition, which I think I'm very interested in. The idea of the artist as auteur, the artist as a signature, the artist as an individual, is something that I think defines the national modern. The idea of the artist, and I should also say that this idea of the artist was very often a male artist, notwithstanding the famous aunt, and in the period after independence. I think that what happens is that Vivan more or less turns his back on this definition of artist. He is no longer interested in being an artist in this sense of the term. So he really shifts into a collaborative structure of defining who makes the art by speaking of the artist as a certain kind of, shall we say, facilitator, a certain kind of an enabler, or a particular idea of a producer of a collaborative project. And this was quite significant. I mean, this was something that, as I was saying, involved a larger and larger circle of people. And, there were many who then got involved in this. So to locate this kind of structure as, you might say, a variant of what he had done as these relatively more, in hindsight, conventional artists' camps and so on in Kasoli into something like this is the shift that I was interested in to talk about. And I think you're right. I mean, I think that one has to map this kind of shift onto this larger political transformation that definitely takes place. For me, the national modern and the kind of structure of a modernism under the aegis of a benevolent nation state is the end of that, which I think is what we are talking about in this transformation.
Hello, sir.
Sorry, someone's...
Hi, sorry, over here, sir.
Okay, I still can't see you. Anyway.
I'm so sorry, sir, right in the front row. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, okay, sorry, yeah, you are.
So, Vivan Sundaram's project, Gaga Waka, has a relatively lighter theme of haute couture, fashion, and the runway. But the project that followed it, post-mortem, is said to be commentary on social issues like aging, illness, and death. Yeah, what do you think brings out this kind of juxtaposition in him?
Yeah, that's a very important question. I mean, there was a certain, I think, post-mortem, precisely coming on the heels of the seemingly celebratory Gaga Waka is an incredibly significant thing. I mean, he was increasingly getting interested in, shall we say, the more, precisely as you say, questions of death, questions of mortality. He was, apart from the fact that he was himself actually often fairly unwell for some time. It's difficult to explain what this transformation is. I mean, the most recent work, in fact, what would eventually be his last exhibition, the one that took place in Sharjah, has, his back, basically what happened in a series of operations. And so these kind of lacerations that exist, that took place on his back as a result of medical treatment. And there are these photographs that he had taken off his back, which are like, stigmata, you might almost say, that, were there. I mean, there is this whole reference to Renaissance in this. So I think it's absolutely correct that that along with, on the one hand, the interest in the Shergill family and a certain sort of an elite culture, which I think he was wanting to explore, was, I think, this other interest in trash and so on. And I think that Gaga Waka definitely has to be seen along with Postmortem and along with a whole series of other works that do deal with these very, shall we say, grim situations that he was also, I think, interested in. So thank you for that question. Sorry?
Gaga Waka was also a very, very grim work.
It was a grim work, yes.
Very
yes.
grim.
Yeah, it was. So thank you very much.